Yeah.
Brilliant. And then, excellent. So, right, excellent. Well, thank you. So, I decided to talk about what I'm going to talk about. For, can everyone hear okay?
Yeah.
Good. Yes. Right. So I decided to talk about what I was going to talk about for two reasons that will be very obvious as we go along, because all of this has a big connection to LIVErNORTH, and so hence the talk. And I called it BBC is the fog beginning to clear. Now, in our world, everyone's always concerned about developing cirrhosis and preventing that from happening. And that's, of course, a very important thing that we do. But in PBC, as there is in other liver diseases, there's something more than that. And the something more than that is the quality of life that people have. And so we pretty much uniquely in Newcastle have had a focus on this, as well as preventing the risks of the disease. So a more holistic approach. We're still innovating in all of this, and the people on the call will be aware we've just in fact launched a new clinic which is focused on the symptoms of PBC, and it's the first in the world to do that. And so the trust have been hugely supportive of allowing us to do that. And I think it looks at all the aspects of disease, but it approaches it from a different angle along the lines that we're going to talk about today. So I think it's really important. This matters to people. Now, the first of the kind of, if you like, personal to all of us things is this, which was written by Tilly. And one of the many pleasures I had is actually publishing things with Tilly. She was a great writer, and she's got more published work than a number of our fellows, I can tell you that. And but this is something that we wrote that was actually published in the BMJ. And it was in what was called the patient view. And we wrote this about symptoms in PBC, and it was a patient view and then a clinical commentary on it. And every single time I talk about symptoms in PBC, I show this slide every single time, because we can talk about numbers, and we're going to talk about numbers, but it's words that are very powerful. And this is the quote I took from the paper. The problem with fatigue is that it's hidden. I don't look different from other people. When I say I'm tired, they tell me how tired they are. And if I try to explain the difference, they don't understand what I'm talking about. When I was first diagnosed, my GP told me they would never get any sympathy, as I would always look reasonably well, and my symptoms would have no impact on other people's understanding of my life. The fatigue that I and my fellow PBC patients contend with is mind-numbing. You feel as if you're in a fog. You can hardly lift one foot in front of the other. Everything is so difficult. You go shopping and then can't unpack the groceries, so the frozen food defrosts and has to be thrown out. And it's very difficult to apply numbers to that. It's very powerful. And I think it paints a picture. But it includes the term fog. And actually, that's a word that's in widespread use and in common currency amongst the PBC patients, brain fog. And again, I think that's very evocative of a difficulty, people having to think their way through something that is very obscure. And it may well not have escaped your notice that that's a word that's used with regard to long COVID. People talk about brain fog, and we're very interested about what, if anything, is a relationship between long COVID symptoms and PBC symptoms, because the words people use are the same. So that's what we're talking about. When you get into numbers, again, one of the things that we've done is use lots of tools in order to measure the impact of quality of life. The reason you have to put numbers to it is if you can't measure it, you can't prove a treatment works for it to the satisfaction of regulators, which means that you can't have a treatment in the clinic. And a treatment you can't use in the clinic is of no use to anybody. So although the words are powerful, you do have to try and apply numbers to it so you can quantify the effect. And this is just a simple thing, asking people about the way in which PBC impact on their quality of life. Ask people, is your quality of life impacted by PBC? And the blue line is the average percentage of people saying that they had quality of life impairment. So well over 50% of the younger patients with PBC had a significant impairment of their quality of life in their view. And then this is age at presentation. So if you present young, you carry that impact all the way through. If you present for the first time over the age of 70, actually the impact's not as great. So there's quite a heavy load there. Now, one of the things that Tilly talked about in that piece was the fact that you didn't get listened to by doctors, or you wouldn't get taken seriously. And again, when I want to shame my colleagues, I present the following few slides, and I title this section, "You Couldn't Make It Up." And these are all things I've had said about symptoms in PBC to me by other clinicians, okay? And quite literally, you couldn't make it up. I don't believe fatigue is real in PBC. That's a nice, easy starter. I get told this all the time. It's not real. Now, I'm very interested. I thought belief was for religious people. This is scientific. So when people say they're fatigued, their doctors don't believe them. And it's interesting. Don't get that about itch, which is the other main symptom in PBC. I don't understand that. I don't believe fatigue is real in PBC, even though people explain the impacts to them. And you know, you read Tilly's words. I never see it in my patients, okay? Well, we know from a lot of the work that we've done, when we actually look at fatigue impact in people all over the country, where we know the impact of fatigue in people because they're taking part in some of our research studies, I can tell you that clinicians who never see it in their patients, they have just as much fatigue in those patients as anywhere else in the country. And of course, it's because the clinicians have a closed mind. They never talk to people about it, and people soon learn there's no point in mentioning it because it will never get taken seriously. So I never see it in my patients. That actually reflects the closed minds of doctors, and patients soon learn there's no point talking about it because you just get abuse. I like this one. People are only fatigued because you tell them, meaning me, so that I tell people they're fatigued and therefore they're fatigued, which suggests an influence over the way people think that I don't really think I have. I think I'm a reasonably persuasive person, but I don't believe that I make people feel tired by telling them. The other reason why I don't think this is true is that actually we have a whole clinic full of people who are referred to us because they've got fatigue. So I haven't really had the chance to tell them because they're coming to us with this problem. So that doesn't really work, but that's another reason. She is very fatigued. Okay, so this is you're not really going to believe this one. She is very fatigued. So that sounds like it's a good start. This was a very famous Italian hepatologist said this. But that's to be expected as she has 2 children and a job. Okay, so we started quite well. We acknowledged she was fatigued, but actually, oh, she works very hard and has children. What do you expect? Most people are smarter than that. They can work out what's normal and what's not normal. People are very, very smart about this. The conversations that we have in the clinic, I think most people would be astonished at the perception that people have, certainly where we have students and fellows sitting in. It's an eye-opener for them. People can really dissect what's going on here, okay? And of course, this is the pièce de résistance. Of course, I see patients who are very fatigued, but they are middle-aged women, okay? Not sure what on earth we're supposed to make of that comment. I mean, you know, that is just wrong on so many levels. So this is part of the problem, that we need to take it seriously. And this is one of the reasons we set up a dedicated clinic, because that says we take all this seriously. And then the only one is, last one is, I only treat proper disease, which is actually quite insulting to people because this can wreck people's lives. And if that isn't proper, I don't know what it is. So we collect these stories because we need to educate them out of the clinician population. It's really, really important. Now, donkeys years ago, 17 years ago, and we published it, and 20 years ago we started it, we decided that if we were ever going to get any symptoms at all, we had to measure it, okay? And many people in LIVErNORTH have spent a lot of time filling these questionnaires in, but this is a very specific tool designed for PBC patients to talk about their symptoms so that those symptoms can then be measured. So you can turn talking about symptoms into a questionnaire that people can fill in, and anybody who's been to our clinics will be familiar with this. And it's quite extraordinary. It was the first ever tool to measure symptom impact in any liver disease in the world. And it is still as useful today as it was in those days. And I absolutely pay tribute to Anne Jacobi and colleagues who actually did the hard work with this, and the many patients who participated, because it's really, really stood the test of time. It's never been improved on. It's still the standard, and it's used throughout the world in order to measure symptoms in PBC. Every single trial in the world in PBC includes this, and we gave it away specifically so people could use it. And I think, you know, that has contributed to all the progress that we're going to talk about. And, you know, all of those times that people at meetings that the Freeman filled in endless versions of this and filled in another version again, just to check its reproducibility, you contributed to something that is a standard clinical test throughout the world. Anyway, so we did this work, and it involves people being able to talk about their symptoms, the way it impacts them, and then to kind of measure the various different things that happen to people. And when you do this, you can identify some themes that come out. So we do it's all very computerized. It's actually very clever. So you feed people's words into a computer, and what it does is it scans for phrases and terms that people use, and it groups them together. It's a thing called thematic analysis. So it identifies sort of phrases that are used that cover similar thematic areas. And then it looks at the way in which these things all come together. So a common example is itch. So people used 3 different broad sayings about itch. One was about itch, one was about irritation of the skin, one was about not being able to sleep, I think. And the computer recognizes those that are linked, and that comes together into 3 items that measure itch. So you do that whole exercise, and what you end up with is 6 different types of symptoms, one of which is symptoms, which is a bit of a hodgepodge of things that didn't fit into everything else. But the other 5 are really distinctive and characteristic. One is itch. Everyone's familiar with that in PBC. One is fatigue, and this is the percentage of people who've got significant symptoms for each of these domains. So fatigue, there are 11 questions PBC-40 that refer to fatigue, and 55% of patients have fatigue to a significant degree on this, either sort of moderate, which is enough to have an impact, and severe, which is enough to really have an impact. So it's the commonest symptom in PBC. So all those clinicians who don't think it exists need to check their prejudice. There's another one called cognitive, which is linked, but it's about concentration and memory and ability to process information. Fatigue can include that, but it can also include power types of things. I just haven't got the energy to do things. Itch is self-explanatory, but a really important one is social. This is 10 questions came out as being linked that were all about inability to do things that connected to the outside world and other people. So ability to work, ability to have friends, go out, go out for the evening and things like that. And that's a really important domain because it's really strongly linked to people's quality of life and perception of it. And so actually, we think that all the other symptoms feed into this. So one of the things that people can do with fatigue is kind of avoid socializing, avoiding doing things because of the physical impact of it. And actually what we now know is that really impacts on people's quality of life, because you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. So fatigue and cognitive and social are a really important focus of what we do. And in order to try and make progress with fatigue, we wanted to try and understand what was fatigue and what was, if you like, cognitive. So what was a kind of energy related fatigue and what was a sort of brain type of fatigue. And this was 2,500 people ultimately in the UK cohort. And we looked at the extent to which people had a link between the fatigue symptoms and the cognitive symptoms. So fatigue is I haven't got any energy, cognitive is I'm struggling to concentrate. And what you can see in the bottom right hand corner, this is how they overlap. So there are 2 sorts of people with fatigue. There are those who do have cognitive symptoms and there are those who don't. And if you see on the left, the ones who don't have cognitive symptoms tend to have milder fatigue. So the bad fatigue of PBC is the one that links energy problems with concentration and memory problems. But really interestingly, if you look at the yellow circle on the right, the yellow oval on the right, there's only a tiny group of people who have cognitive problems without fatigue. And one of the common questions that we're always asked is, am I developing dementia? I'm struggling to remember things. I'm really worried about this. And this is the answer to that. No, you're not, because this almost only ever coexists with fatigue, which is a very PBC specific thing. So that's really important. And the other thing we learned from all of this is that the combination of cognitive symptoms and fatigue, those were typically the younger patients. So this group of people who have bad quality of life, it is this combination. So this is what we're going after in terms of the trial. So this is a very specific group of people. Now, again, there'll be a number of people who've taken part in this, and this is the iPads that we are giving out as part of some of the research projects in the clinic. And these are what we call cognitive tests. And this is a computer-based system, so the technology is fantastic now. And these are like memory and concentration things. So it's a highly sophisticated version of the old memory game we used to do as kids. You know, can you remember where the two penguins are? So this tests people's ability to remember and process information. And the point is, it takes this game and it converts it into data about how well people are doing. And the detail of this absolutely doesn't matter at all. But on the right is this interesting list of things that people are bad at and one thing people are really good at. So PBC patients are bad at what we call paired learning. So that literally where are the two penguins memory game, people struggle at remembering two items on a board. Working memory and strategy, where this is problem solving, where you have to carry information forward and use it to solve problems. And we know that one of the things people struggle with at work is exactly that type of thing. So, you know, calculating things, people calculating their things in their mind. Attention and data processing, so ability to follow the thread of an argument, that can be a struggle. And then one I think is really interesting is emotional recognition. What do faces say? In this test, people are shown a face, standard face, non-celebrity or anything. It's just an ordinary face, and that face is then adapted to show various different emotions. So it's an actor showing happiness, showing anger, showing fear, showing confusion, showing sadness very quickly. And people really, really struggle to understand what that face says. And I just keep coming back to the social isolation thing that we talked about, is that if people struggle to read people, then that can make them retreat away from social interaction. So that's a very specific thing. And problem solving, okay? So there's a very characteristic set of things. What, however, patients are better than everybody else at is simple visual reaction. So a light comes on, you press a button. So people are not struggling to respond to a visual stimulus. They are struggling to interpret that stimulus. So it's not responding to it, it is processing it and then responding to it. So this is all about ability to process information. So it's a very characteristic thing. Pretty much everybody with the symptoms has this problem set, and this is what we're trying to correct as we move forward with drugs. Now, one of the frustrating things at the moment is where we are is that none of the treatments we have appear to work with this. It's just some data from UK Pbc for URSO. This is UK Pbc for URSO, and it doesn't really show that there's any benefit at all with URSO. And that's, you know, an issue with all of the drugs that we currently use. So we're looking for new things. Now, before we do all of that, we have a clinic to treat people. So what do? And we have an algorithm to be able to support the management we do. So these are actually slides I use to train the fellows in the clinic about how to do this. And it's a thing we call TRACE, okay? In fact, it applies to pretty much any chronic disease, and it's about how you think about it and how you approach it. And there's treat the treatable, ameliorate the amelioratable, cope and empathize. So anybody who comes to our fatigue clinic, they'll recognize us doing these steps one by one. This is the formula we work our way through. And we hope one day to have drugs that will correct these problems. And I'll tell you where the top 3 candidates are at the moment, because we actually are coming into clinical trials now. It's very exciting. So these are, but we're going to need to use those drugs in the form of a framework. So just giving people tablets when they've been struggling for a while is not going to do it. So we do have to take this holistic approach. This is uber holistic medicine. And before, and once we've gone through TRACE, we always say to people, don't fail before you start. Don't roll your eyes. Don't say I only treat people with proper illness. Don't say I'm tired, I was on call last night. You know, how dare you talk to me about fatigue? I've heard all these things. So don't fail before you start. So this is what we do. So treat the treatable. There are some things that happen to people with fatigue that are part of kind of the whole PBC complex and that are quite easy to treat. So itch, if people itch at night, it's really associated with fatigue. So that's a very powerful thing to treat. And we have a whole raft of new itch treatments coming along, which is good. There are a number of conditions that go along with PBC, like overlap or underactive thyroid or anemia conditions, all of which cause fatigue. So we look for those and we treat them because those are some quick wins. And then there are, of course, some things that can go along with perhaps older patients where those things are associated with fatigue. So type 2 diabetes in our population, probably the commonest treatable cause of fatigue. So that's not linked with PBC at all. But if you're 70, you're at risk of that as well as a PBC. So we go through some easily treatable things that could be making it worse, where we can make a quick difference. Ameliorate the amelioratable is a bit of a mouthful, but it talks really about three things, actually. Fourth one that we think about as well. And these are some things that are clearly associated with PBC and associated with fatigue, but aren't sort of direct kind of features. They're things that are part of the process that gives you fatigue. Now, one of these is depression. This creates all manner of kind of problems because people think we're saying they're depressed because they've got fatigue, and we're not. But it can, we frequently come across people who get down with the fatigue and the problems that they get. So treating this can be very helpful for people because it can take a layer away from this. So this is not to say that the fatigue is caused by depression, but depression can make the fatigue worse. In practice, most people are very rational about this. They've worked it out in their head. So we find talking therapy is not that useful because people are doing it themselves in the family. Sometimes that's useful. So we do use antidepressants in some people. And then the other two, which we do talk about a lot, are autonomic dysfunction. This is the stuff we did with Julia Newton many years ago. Essentially dizziness when you stand up. It's people's blood pressure dropping, which is an important part of PBC. It's very common in PBC patients, particularly with fatigue. What it means is that your blood flow in and out of your muscles isn't as good as it could be, and that means that you can get tired. It's if you get very dehydrated, you get very tired. It's exactly the same effect. So we do a lot about regulating blood pressure, looking at whether perhaps people are on antihypertensives that they shouldn't be on, and supporting them with fluid and things like that to correct that. And then sleep. Sleep's really important. So sleep disturbance is very common. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but sleep appears to be at the heart of this because we see a lot of daytime sleepiness in people, very common. I start off fine in the morning, I just run out of energy. By the mid-afternoon, I want to go to sleep. And we'll talk about that some more because that appears to be a really important clue. And then Sjögren's very important. You know, dry eyes and dry mouth. If you, every time you blink, your eyes, are stinging, that can be a very important thing. So these are all important treatable parts of it. So we go through this in everybody. Coping is really important. Energy management, treat energy, and most people again have worked this out for themselves, but here are some pointers that we can work through with people where they perhaps maybe struggle with that. So energy management, treat energy as a valuable resource, spend it wisely. You'll have a certain amount of energy in the day. When it's gone, it's gone. You'll need to wait until tomorrow. So use it for the things that you want to do. And I think some concepts are very powerful. Day planning, fatigue and PBC is classically better in the morning, gets worse during the course of the day. We work on helping people, get out to do night shifts with evening work, things like that. So if you've got important meetings, do them in the morning. So it's part of using your energy as if it's a valuable resource. The third one's really important. We talk very much openly about people. It's about ownership of the problem. We have a mantra, which is own the problem, own the solution, is that ultimately these things are about you finding a way through it. And in order to do that, in a sense, you need to kind of accept the issue and move on to the solution. And in particular, in a sense, we don't, it's not useful to blame me or other doctors because we haven't got a therapy. We're working on it as fast as we can. But at the end of the day, it's your life and your problem. And it's important for people to kind of realize that we can work together on solving this. But being fed up because it's happened and, grumpy with the world isn't going to solve anything. It's a case of kind of trying to own the solution. And then lifestyle, these issues about keeping and building social structures. For the reasons that I said before, there's some data I'm just going to show you in a second around exercise and diet and antioxidants we'll talk about specifically because I think there's some very specific data there now. This is a pilot study a number of years ago. There's going to be a study published out of Birmingham fairly shortly showing that structured exercise is very useful. And this is some work that we did. This is, top left is people before and after an exercise program. And the top right is, so top left shows that fatigue improves, top right shows that itch doesn't. That would kind of make sense. We don't imagine itch would improve. But interestingly, we showed that social function improved. And this was before we appreciated that social was an important part of quality of life. So exercise helped people feel like they were able to do more in the way of social interaction. So I think that was an early pointer to that being important. So the Birmingham study is very good. It shows it's possible. There were no problems with people doing it, but people did find it a struggle to get going. And I think that's where we need to think about how this works in practice. And then empathize. This is not for patients. This is kind of for family members, but also most of all for medics, is empathy, not sympathy. Empathy is about appreciating, trying to understand the impact and recognizing that, and to work with somebody. Nobody wants us to feel sorry for them. Fatigue is real, treated as such. Just because it's not specific PBC doesn't reduce the impact on patients. We get told this all the time. Well, fatigue, it happens in other conditions. What, it's nothing to do with liver doctors. Well, it's certainly your problem. And so a doctor saying it's not their problem, even though it's your problem, isn't that helpful to you. So we ask people to see it through the eyes of the patient. To remember that fatigue frequently matters more to patients than disease severity. It's about now, today, my family, my children, here today, the next 5 years with my family. Abstract concepts of liver transplant in the future, people are very philosophical about, in my experience. So this really does matter. And just to try and avoid this disconnect with not responding to therapy, just because it doesn't get better with URSA, it shows that URSA doesn't treat fatigue. It doesn't mean that in some way the fatigue is not part of PBC. How bad your chest pain is bears no resemblance to how bad your coronary arteries are. So again, I think the reason why doctors are negative about this is they don't know what to do. And this is, if they kind of pretend it's not there, it gets them away from having to do anything. So this is what we do in practice to help clinicians. But this in a way reflects the fact we lack the killer drug that really makes this go away. Now, one of the things that is important is if you do all of this, it sounds kind of a little bit soft, if you like, but we actually implemented this in the ordinary clinic and showed actually that it really does improve people's fatigue, and it does improve people's cognitive symptoms over a year. If you do all of these things, actually, and this was across our whole clinic, this is everybody in the clinic at the beginning, everybody in the clinic at the end, it actually does work in terms of making people's symptoms. This is the justification we use for setting up a clinic that was dedicated to this. So this attention to detail does work. However, all of this would absolutely be added to by having a drug that we could use as part of this supportive and rehabilitation program. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to do this talk is that it's extremely interesting and exciting. We now have 3 candidates, one of which is in clinical trial, one of which will be in clinical trial by the end of the year, and one of which you can actually go out and get online. And I'll tell you a little bit about that at the end. Okay, so this is the new frontier in PBC, and these are all drugs aimed at brain fog. Okay. So obeticholic acid, I said that conventional PBC treatments didn't work for this. And the caveat is conventional PBC treatments don't work as we currently use them. And we think that's absolutely crucial. Now, we do very little animal modeling because there is no animal model of PBC, but there are certain aspects, particularly if you want to use drugs, that are important. And this is some work that we've done that's actually led directly onto a patient trial. And we can, to cut a very long story short, in animals recreate the memory problems that people with PBC have. Okay, so we can actually have a test that shows exactly the problems that people have. And again, I won't go into the detail, but this value is normal. This value is abnormal. You are looking for a normal value about 70% on this scale. And when the mice are dropping to about 30%, that's their memory abnormality. So just 70% and 30% of the things to remember. Okay, so we can model this in animals. So that means we can start to look at therapies that might reverse this. And the very short answer is obeticholic acid in this model completely reverses memory problems, but you have to use it right at the beginning of the disease, not in mouse years, years down the line. So remember what I said, 70% is good, 30% is bad. So these are the cholestatic, these are the animals that are untreated, down at 30%, that's bad. These are the animals that got obeticholic acid, around 60% good. So they are responding fully to the treatment in terms of their memory. Their memory is returned to normal. And this is the same thing with ursodeoxycholic acid, so that has no effect. So the first observation is obeticholic acid seems to reverse this, provided you use it earlier in the disease. And actually, what it appears to be doing is reversing a process in the brains of the animals. So this is the presence of something we call senescence, which is where zombie cells form. So we used to the thought that cells in the body die with disease, but there is an additional state that cells can go into what's called a zombie state or senescence, where they don't respond, don't function, don't die. They're just in a sort of suspended animation. They don't do the things that cells are supposed to do. And you can tell these cells because they put something called P21, it's a protein, on their surface. So you can measure the presence of these cells. And this is precisely what happens to the bile duct cells in PBC. They become senescent. That's why people get PBC. So we've known about this for donkey's years. So people with bad PBC develop P21 on their cells, okay? And this is literally what's happening in the brain cells of these animals. They're expressing P21, their neurons are becoming senescent. But if you give the mice obeticholic acid, you prevent that from happening. So obeticholic acid reverses senescence. It reverses this zombie state in cells. It does it in the liver. It also does it in the brain cells. And the other thing it does is that you may have read recently a lot of speculation about leaky brains. That this certainly happens in long COVID, that there is normally a very sort of specific coating around the brain that we all have. It's called the blood-brain barrier that stops nasty things getting into the brain. And we now know in cholestasis, which is the process you get in PBC, this becomes a little bit leaky, and this potentially allows toxins in that can poison the brain. And obeticholic acid completely normalizes this. And this is why we have a sneaking suspicion that obeticholic acid may have some uses well beyond PBC in any of those diseases where you get leaky brain sort of linings, like, for example, long COVID. So there's something very interesting about obeticholic acid does to cell health. So it reverses zombie cell status and it seals the brain off again. And we are now doing this in a clinical trial. This is the OAKS trial, which is now open in Newcastle, and it is obeticholic acid for cognitive symptoms. And this is in two flavors, if you like. One is for anybody with cognitive symptoms. And then the second version of this is for people who are relatively newly diagnosed with PBC, which is maybe the group where it will work better. And the main way of measuring benefit is through the computer test that I showed you, the iPad test, but also doing all the things you might expect, which is measuring questionnaires, but also doing some MR scanning to look at people's brains. So please, 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 please spread the word wide around. Anybody who's got brain fog with PBC and who is interested in taking part in this, we badly need to recruit people. It's not been helped by COVID and all the issues around it. So this is the first ever trial targeting brain fog in people with PBC. So it's up and running and people can go into it now. That's the first of these. The second is a completely different approach, and it's a drug called Golexanalone. This came about from some very, very lateral thinking, and it's all about the sleep. Remember I said that sleep's a problem? Julia and I, donkeys years ago, published this, which is the thing that proves that people really sleep badly with PBC. So we use a thing called the Epworth sleepiness scale. The higher the value, the worse the sort of its situation. And it measures daytime sleepiness, okay? So its maximum is 24, minimum is 0. And the thing to look out for is that if you have a score of 10, that's the level at which normally you'd be referred to a sleep clinic to be investigated as to why you have abnormal daytime sleepiness. These are entirely unselected PBC patients and normal healthy controls in population. They're down around about 4. Yeah, we all get sleepy occasionally. The average PBC patient's almost at that threshold of 10. Okay, and if you look at people with significant fatigue, you find that with significant fatigue, it's way above 14. So there is a dramatic issue with daytime sleep in fatigued PBC patients. And actually, we then went on to measure the amount of time people actually were sleeping during the day. Were they just feeling sleepy or were they sleeping? The answer is they were sleeping during the day. So something in the fatigue of PBC, and we now know this to be the fatigue with cognitive symptoms, is strongly associated with sleepiness. And this is our experience with a drug called modafinil. Okay, so modafinil is a drug with a bad name. got a bad name by being picked up by American college students, because what it does is keep you awake. And so they were using it to stay awake, to cram for exams. And this ended up, taking it out of normal clinical practice. So it's a well-established drug for people with significant daytime sleepiness, but it is a stimulant. And what it does is keeps you artificially awake, if you like. And so it certainly does what we said on the 10. So we took a group of people, all with an ESS above 10. That's the reason why I'd want it. And we used this. And what you saw is the majority of people went way down with it. And when you did this, their fatigue went way down as well. And their cognitive symptoms went way down as well. So in people with bad daytime sleep, this really works. But it also worked, in addition to working for sleep, also worked for fatigue and for cognitive symptoms. It's not a treatment for fatigue, it's a treatment for sleep disturbance that will improve fatigue, because these people with sleep disturbance have always got fatigue. The problem is people hate taking it because it gives you headaches and it makes you feel jumpy. So it kind of overstimulates people, and it isn't the answer, but it tells us that if you get on top of the sleep, you're likely to be able to get on top of the fatigue. And this led on to the left field thing, because we then did some work measuring some things called neurosteroids. So these are chemicals produced by the brain as part of its response to injury. And it was a very left field reason why we looked at all of this, but we found this very interesting observation, that this chemical was significantly increased in the blood of people with bad cognitive symptoms. So think of it as a distress signal from the brain. And this is elevated in people with bad cognitive symptoms. So we thought this was very interesting. And it also associates with daytime sleepiness. So as part of this, fatigue, daytime sleepiness, and this brain distress signal all go together, okay? And this is a log scale, so this is actually quite a dramatic difference. Now, this chemical actually works on the brain to switch it off. So as part of the distress action, what it does is it's a steroid, and so it damps down brain action. So what it does is switch the brain down to protect it if it's being injured. So it's really increased things like a stroke. And so it's probably not just a marker of what's going on, it's probably a mechanism by which the brain responds to a certain situation by damping down activity. And so it probably drives why people feel sleepy, okay? And there is a drug called Golexanalone, GR3027 is the same thing. And if you take normal individuals and you give them allopregnanolone, this brain, if you like, this brain protecting thing, they feel dramatically sleepy. So these are normal people given allopregnanolone in the blood, and they all just go to sleep, okay, because it makes them sleepy. And if you give these individuals allopregnanolone and then this drug, it blocks the effect completely and they wake up, but they have none of the side effects at all that we saw with modafinil. They don't feel speeded up, they don't feel anxious, they don't get headaches, they just wake up. And the people who developed all of the drug have done this. They give allopregnanolone, they fall asleep, they give the blocker, they wake up, and you can just switch people, literally switch people on and off like that. Remember, this is the chemical that is elevated in the blood of people with fatigue, okay? So, fairly obviously, it's a completely safe drug. It's been trialed in humans in other situations. It has no side effects as far as we're aware of. And we are desperately keen to trial this in PBC patients with cognitive symptoms. And we are working very closely with a company called Umacrine, and we've brought them into PBC. They used to work in neurological disease, and they're really excited about a trial in PBC. And this will be starting towards the end of this year. And I have really high hopes that this will make a big difference. And then the third is S-adenosylmethionine. And this brings us full circle in so many ways. And S-adenosylmethionine is a bit of a mouthful, but it's also been around since the beginning of time. And the very, very, very first time I met Tilly was in 1989, when she was taking part in a trial of S-adenosylmethionine. And at that time, this was a trial of a drug because it thought it protected people from cirrhosis, okay? And it probably does, but probably at that time was being used too late in the disease. But one of the things she said to me in the clinic is that the only thing that had ever made the fatigue better was this drug, S-adenosine methionine. And it's something that we've been watching for years and years and years. But the big problem is we couldn't use it because literally nobody sold it in the UK. You couldn't get hold of it. There is, however, a trial that shows it really works in PBC fatigue. So this is PBC for patients. It's a big trial, 340 people, but it's done in 1990. Everyone forgets about it because it's done a long time ago. And so, you know, people tend to just forget about things that were done in the past, but it's a big trial. And this is the fatigue severity in people given the drug. It gets dramatically better. Stop the drug, it gets worse again. And there's a little bit of a benefit with the placebos. That's the placebo effect. So we forget these things. But this is the biggest trial ever done of fatigue and PBC. And this drug really, really worked. Remember what Tilly said, it's the only drug that ever helped her fatigue, even though she wasn't in a trial that was measuring fatigue. So there couldn't be a placebo effect, because we weren't asking about that symptom. It's widely used in the Eastern Europe, and this is a very nice lady I know from Ukraine who is currently displaced because of the trouble in Ukraine. I can tell you I've worked with colleagues in Ukraine. I've been there a number of times, and it is literally heartbreaking what is happening. So this has impacted on people I know, whose families I know, and it's just awful. She's a very nice lady who has been using this and published it in her patients with PBC, okay, amongst other cholestatic conditions. And look at this. This is complete resolution of fatigue in 40% of people after 2 months. Okay, it's almost the same degree of effect as was seen in the original trial. She's a very good gastroenterologist, and this is a very striking benefit. And we think we know how it works. It's to do with a thing called glutathione. Glutathione is a really important vitamin that is present in our circulation and in our tissues, and it helps detoxify. It helps protect tissues from inflammation and the actions of free radicals. So it is something we must have in our bodies to protect us from toxic injury, okay? And glutathione is made out of S-adenosine methionine. Adamet is one of the commercial names for it. So S-adenosine methionine is something that is converted into glutathione. So it's a really effective way of giving people glutathione, okay? And remember, we've talked about brain distress signals, the effect of inflammation, toxicity, and all of that. This is a detoxifier, and this is the chemical that lets us make it. Why is this relevant for PBC? Long time ago, some very good people measured the levels of glutathione in the blood of PBC patients, and it is almost completely non-existent. It's all burnt up, it's all gone. So people are massively glutathione depleted. Okay, and this is a scale, this goes all the way around to 0. This is not lowered, this is almost completely gone. But it's very difficult to give glutathione, so the answer is to give S-adenosine methionine. And you can now get it in the UK. So the internet is very bad for many things, but it's good for some things, which is you can get things that are available you know, elsewhere in the world that are now. So it was never not licensed here. It's just that nobody sold it. No, there was no market for it. It was as simple as that. And this is one of a number of companies that will sell S-adenosine methionine. And I know a number of patients who are taking it. We have produced a number of leaflets in the new clinic, and one of them is around vitamins and supplements. We now actually include this. It has been trialed in more patients with PBC than any other drug for fatigue. It's completely safe. It's a vitamin. It's available over the counter almost everywhere else in the world. It's in sports shops in North America because it helps people with exercise, and it helps with cognitive symptoms. It helps with fatigue. And so, to be quite honest, if I had PBC and I had fatigue, I would try this. There are a number of people can get it. Now, I have a theory, one of the reasons why nobody knows about this is the abbreviation SAMe. SAME is how we describe it. But of course, if you put that into a search engine, you get about 400 million hits because the word same, as the opposite of different, comes up. So you have to put in S-adenosine methionine. But John will record all of this, and people can find that. And it's in the leaflets that we're giving out to people. And if people are interested in a vitamin or a supplement that will help with this, this literally has extensive trial evidence to show that it works. So what does all of this mean? What does all of this mean? I think this is a really big problem in PBC and has real implications for quality of life, and it's one that's been broadly neglected for a long, long time. It's part of a broader complex. It's part of fatigue. It's all about words, and the words are powerful. But we think this is the key bit. The brain fog is the real key driver in for this. I think all the evidence we've got, and this is just a fraction of what we've done over the last 15 years or so, shows that it's an organic process. This is real, it's chemical, okay? You can measure it. You can measure it using imaging, you can measure it using chemical tests. It's real, it's chemical, it's an imbalance. And the moment it's an imbalance like that, it should be treatable, because if we can get whatever it is back into balance, just for the sake of argument, if it is a glutathione depletion, we know that glutathione is depleted. We know that it's toxic to be short of that. And we have a drug that repletes that. Now, I don't know if giving that drug will correct it, but it's not going to make it worse, is it? So it should be treatable. Now, developing these therapies is difficult. Okay, it's much easier to measure liver function tests, much easier to measure alkaline phosphatase than it is to kind of measure brain changes. And that's why nobody's done this, because it's not easy. But there is real progress. So we do a lot of this. Mark Swain in Canada, a lot of people will have come across, a number of colleagues in Switzerland do this. So there's a small number of groups around the world who do this, but we're making real progress. But I do think once we're able to treat this, and we will be able to, we're getting there, it's likely that people will need rehabilitation to get back to normal function. Think if you've been bedbound for a month, you're as weak as a kitten afterwards. So if we do get people energized again, it's not going to instantly cure them. We are going to have to still do the things to help them work. And this is why we have the dedicated symptoms clinic, because this is going to be a journey back to normal function. But it's going to be a journey that's really worth doing. And I genuinely think that the fog really is about to clear. So when I put this together, I put a lot of data slides in, and I thought that people want to see what we're actually doing, and I hope I've made it accessible to people. But we have been teasing away at this for a long time, and I genuinely believe that 1, 2, or 3 of those drugs will make a big, big difference. I would love to do a proper clinical trial of S-adenosine, but I don't think we're going to. But the other 2 are absolutely there now. So with that, I shall stop.
Excellent, Dave. Thanks very much. We've got some questions, and our first one is from Fiona. You put a slide up of that people with fatigue and cognitive symptoms have difficulty recognizing people.
Yes.
You've done
Yes.
the trials with facial recognition.
Yes. Yes.
So she's asking us if you've got the evidence for that. You know, have we got a paper or something?
It's in the process of being written as we speak. Okay. It's in the process of being written. But I laughed because the answer is yes. So it's not quite recognizing people that they already know, because that's more difficult to test, but interpreting facial features and reaching conclusions, which is the same thing, is one of the specific abnormalities that people have. So it's to do, and the reason I showed the thing about I made the comment about rapidity of rapid visual response is that see something, press a button, is normal. Okay, so the seeing isn't, that tells you the seeing's normal, and the ability to press a button is normal, but seeing, processing, pressing a button is abnormal. And so the reason why that's important is it tells you it's the processing.
Yeah, it's the brain fog that's the problem. Yeah.
It's the fog, and it's and I'm convinced that this is part of social isolation, because rather in the same way, face-to-face meetings are easier for people than Zoom meetings. Zoom meetings are easier than phone calls. We really rely on visual cues, and we rely on those human interactions. So the psychologists do an awful lot of work in this area. So it's all children learning to speak. It's all a critical part of this. So we are programmed to recognize the face as an integral thing. So we've evolved to do all of that, and that just seems to not work as well. So, and we've got numbers that we can put on it. So that paper is in the process of being written up, but this is more problematic for people than and I guess Fiona's alluding to this. This can be more problematic to people than you perhaps imagine, because it can cause practical problems. What we think about the brain fog is where people are struggling at work. It's usually in this space, okay, and it's because people, usually in a higher powered job, where you've got to process information. So I've come across solicitors who struggle with it. I've come across accountants who struggle with it. I've come across academics who struggle with it. I've come across teachers who struggle with it. Come across pharmacists who struggle with it. And anything where you've got to process information rapidly, then it can be quite problematic. Now, how common is this? I think how much you would notice a problem like this does depend on what you ask of yourself, okay? And so, one of the things I say to people is you only know you can't do the Times crossword if you normally do the Times crossword, okay? So partly this is fatigue is a general feeling. Cognitive stuff is more of an inability to do specific things, and you will only truly know about it if you try and do those specific things. So it may be a more broadly based problem than we think, but other people may, in a sense, not be aware of it because they kind of haven't asked themselves those questions, or they may actually have, and I think the social isolation thing, it might be because you're fatigued, haven't got the energy to do it. You might be worried that you won't be able to, go out for a walk or something. It might be, with itch. We think itch is important for this one as well. People get self-conscious about scratching in public, they isolate for that. But this, inability to read people's faces and, saying the wrong thing and things like that, I wonder if that actually, can, worry people. And often it's worry of problems that stops people doing things rather than they actually got problems. Amongst the groups, I'm wittering on now, but amongst the groups that I found really struggle are teachers, okay? And it's because of the timetable nature of what they do. So I've got to teach, Form 4A at 3 o'clock on a Thursday, and that's a horrible class. Actually, there is the potential that you'll be really struggling by that point, but there's also the fear you'll be really struggling. And of course, it can be commoner to have the fear than the actual problem. So, and we actually now increasingly spend time talking to employers about adjusting daily routines to take account of a lot of these things. So for example, having a escape plan for people who are really, so the best way to avoid it as a teacher is to avoid teaching at 3 o'clock, a difficult class at 3 o'clock, do it at 9 o'clock. So that's a timetabling thing. And then the other one is to have a plan if you're really struggling. So understanding from employers. And of course, what that does is give you confidence, and it means it's paradoxically less likely that people will end up not being able to do it because they have a plan in case they do. So we do a lot of stuff. This is around coping strategies. Yeah. So it's more than just saying people, try and cope with this. It's about coming up with particular practical hacks that can both make it easier, but also give people confidence that they've got a plan B if problems arise.
Sounds great. So is that okay, Fiona? Yeah, do you know you've recognized everybody? Then that must be good. Joan, you had a question?
Yeah, you asked us to get the word out about the trial.
Yes.
In February, we shared a poster.
Yes.
And the contact was, well, 2 contacts, and Catherine Horton and Aaron Wetton. Is that still the same?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Or me.
All right.
You. So we will do it again. That's the one for the OACS2.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people won't know if they've got the right kind of level of symptoms. So that if anybody mentions the symptoms at all, then just please, we can have a chat with them and work out whether it's going to be appropriate for them. And of course, trials are not for everybody. The important thing is obeticholic acid is also very widely used in PBC, so it's a drug that we've got a lot of familiarity with. It's not an experimental drug. We almost never use drugs in any of the PBC trials that have not been trialed in other settings. So it's a thing that we call repurposing. So what we're doing is keeping a constant lookout for drugs that impact on pathways that we know are important, but the people who've developed the drugs may not know. So, the company that did Golexanalone, we cold called them. We said, have you got any idea? Did you know you've got a drug that's really interesting? And so they've now become a PBC company based on all of that. So we're pretty smart at spotting those opportunities because rather like bezafibrate, a lot of people are familiar with that in PBC. That's a drug that's been around for a long time. So, and of course, if they have been, elafibranor is one that's being trialed at the moment. That's been widely used for a number of years. So I think it gives people confidence that the drugs are ones that people are familiar with, but it's the use in this setting that's new. But the big thing I think that we are looking at in PBC is that timing, I think, is going to be critical. And the next big thing, and Fiona knows all about this because she's helping us out with the next of the big trials, which is called OPERA, is to do something that I talked about many times at these meetings before, is can you cure PBC? And I remember saying a decade ago that I thought that we could in a way that I didn't think we could before that, but you have to do it early. And it's all about reversing this zombie cell effect. And the next trial we're doing starting next year is to take people out the diagnosis of PBC and basically see if we can cure them. And that's a government funded trial. So we are pushing back on all the frontiers, if you like.
Fantastic.
If I had £1, it's Golexanalone. Okay, it's Golexanalone. If I had £1, looking at the data, I've shown you a fraction of the data suggesting you should use it, and if you put it all together, the story is compelling. Now we all know life doesn't always work like that, but it is completely safe. And when they've done their other trials, there are no side effects with it. It lacks that stimulant thing. And if it reverses the sleepiness in the way it does in every other study it's done, in every study, in every setting it's been used, it normalizes that ESS score I showed you. If it does that in PBC, I would eat my hat if that doesn't significantly improve fatigue.
So this is sold over the counter, is it?
No, Golexanalone is the.
Sorry, I thought you were talking about the SAM.
And Golexanalone is a drug, but Golexanalone is the trial that will start back end of this year, I think.
Brilliant. So the other one, the SAM-E one that you can get from that's got no side effects either. You said.
Okay.
Nothing. That's brilliant. So it's kind of a vitamin supplement or something.
It is a vitamin. It is a vitamin.
Yeah,
it's just one. And the problem with vitamins is that they're subject to commercial whims. And in terms of, so there are regulations about vitamins. The stuff you go and buy in Tesco's, but they're different. It's not a similar regulatory thing. No, so there's nothing dodgy about it. It's fully legal to get it. These are companies, and it may, I suspect, very shortly it will be available in vitamin shops. And I haven't looked recently, so somebody may well come along and say they've found it. In which case, that's great. But S-adenosine methionine, it's as I say, it's used in a number of different places. It's very widely used, as I say, in Eastern Europe, and we've known for a long time. We did some really wacky science measuring, putting people's hands in a scanner, and if you do some clever scanning, you can actually measure the glutathione in their skin. And it's really weird. So, you can do a scan that measures your glutathione level. And at the time, that was a technology that had no purpose. I mean, it was clever to be able to do it, but we didn't do anything with it. But from that point, we were very struck. From that point, we did that, never published it actually. There's something weird about glutathione, and I think it's all burnt up. I think it's just consumed in the disease. And so you know, possibly over a length of time. So you deplete it, and people then have none, and so therefore you can't get this detoxifying effect. And so that's essentially what you're doing. It's an effective way of giving glutathione. I think you can get it, glutathione, but I think it's quite difficult to put it into a tablet, as I understand it.
All right. So any more? Is that a historic hand, Joan?
No. I was just going to ask if you mentioned a leaflet that you give out in clinic.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Could we have a copy of that?
Yes, you can. So,
and can we share that on our website?
Yes, you can. So I'm very happy to do that. So I have just written them in the last 2 weeks, 2-3 weeks, to go to the clinic, because we're giving people a lot of guidance. So the Monday clinic, which is where we do the symptom stuff, much less likely to leave with a drug, much more likely to leave with a plan, okay, because of the nature of all of this. And so you get information overload very easily. And so, and, you know, we see people repeatedly, and, you know, to reinforce all of that, but we're very keen to have people leave with something. So there are now 4 leaflets, which you're very welcome to put on the website. I'm going to have a read of and check you're happy with them, but they were just me putting my thoughts down on paper so that people could leave with something. It's in a sense the script that we work from. I'll send them to you tomorrow.
Excellent.
Brilliant. Would it be possible, well, if it is possible, and this is up to John, to include it in the PBC leaflet that we already have?
Yes. They're kind of A4 text. They're A4 page text. But they're designed to be, there's nothing, you know, in a sense medical in them. There's nothing, you know, where people are, you know, think we talk about blood pressure and things, and we caveat it like you do about, you know, not making any changes to what you do without assessing the doctor. So they are caveated, but have a look at them. So if you are, obviously I normally give them to people and talk through them. So I'd be very appreciative if you guys had a look at them, and I'm happy to make any changes you think will be appropriate if you're going to, in a sense, disseminate them without the conversation, if you like. That's
good. So on the
great idea, by the way. I hadn't thought of that, but that's a great idea.
Oh, we're more than happy. The other one was you talked about Tilly, the patient's journey, you know, this beautiful things that you said. We've incorporated that now in our leaflet number 18 on fatigue. So we've actually got the talk. It's all in one leaflet now.
Yes.
So if you need to, you know, show people Tilly's journey, the patient's journey, and the other stories of people who suffer from chronic fatigue, it's all now in leaflet 18.
Yes.
But unfortunately, of course, the infection control have still ruled we can't have the leaflets on display at the Freeman or the RVI. So I don't know why. That's still ongoing. We're still trying to get them. We've got them in every other hospital, by the way. We've distributed them. They're in North Tees. They're in Cumbria. They're in Sunderland. They're in North.
I mean, we're back to normal. I mean, we offer people the option of we have a blended model now, so we use some phone follow-up because it's just convenient for people. So what we're tending to do is a lot of people in the fatigue clinic, for example, will alternate. So we'll see them, and then we'll do a follow-up to see how it's going, and then but that's based on patient convenience and choice. And actually it's something we didn't do before, and it actually is very helpful. I mean, we're very aware we get people, particularly in the fatigue clinic, we are seeing people from all over the country, and it's quite people coming from long way, and it is a journey. So we're sensitive to the fact that some phone follow-ups are useful, but I think it is important to kind of have face contact when you're explaining difficult things.
Absolutely. Well, if you get the chance to talk to infection control, we got 25 leaflets to put in every clinic. People can just pick them up. And I don't know why they're still holding off at the Newcastle hospital, but nevertheless. So that's brilliant, Dave. You've got a small audience here, but it now goes on social media. And
I think we've got 2 more questions.
Oh yeah, sorry, Liz or
I've got 5 minutes before.
I don't know who was first. We'll give Liz or Alf first.
Right, it's just looking at that medicine that you can get over the counter. In theory, I've just had a look at it online.
Yeah.
What dosage?
Really good question. A really good question. So it's not cheap is one of the problems. And as I say, we are still working on getting a clinical trial of it to evaluate it formally to be able to prescribe it eventually down the line. And it's, I mean, you couldn't make this up. It's prescribable in Italy, but nowhere else in the EU. And I just don't understand that. Anyway, so the answer is that so it's commonly available as 200 and 400 milligrams. The trials actually use a higher dose than that, up to 1,000 milligrams, but I think that would get very expensive. My recommendation would be 400 milligrams. I certainly wouldn't give 200 milligrams. I think what happens is people get depleted over a length of time. So over time, you go lower, and I think you will re-supplement with it. So I suspect that what you'll find is you take it and then you build the stocks up. And so if you take a slightly lower dose, then it'll just take longer to fill up again. But I think because, you know, most people's diet isn't short of it, it's just being over-consumed. And obviously, as we work on controlling the disease better, so you get less inflammation and less consumption, presumably it will be easier. But you know, the glutathione study we did with the hands was, you know, in modern days, so it's still an issue. So I think the highest dose you can, but I am aware it's not cheap. And I think for most people, I would give it a month and see what, month or 2 months and see what happens.
Yeah, we'll do. We'll give it a go
tonight.
We'll try it. Yeah.
I think one thing that's really useful is for people to feed back, and I think we are, you know, very interested. You know, this may turn out to be nothing, okay? And there are plenty of drugs. Sertraline for itch, okay? Sertraline is supposed to be an effective therapy for itch in PBC. It's got clinical trials that show it works. Doesn't work at all, and we don't use it. So, you know, there can be brilliantly good ideas that don't pan out in practice. So real world experience, if people take this and it has no benefit at all, let us know, because we need to know that. If you feel better with it, then, you know, collecting the words is very important. Remember what I said at the beginning about this? Words are powerful. What can you do now what do you do after taking something that you weren't able to do before? You know, I remember somebody talking about the effectiveness of a treatment, and the difference was being able to go ballroom dancing when he couldn't go ballroom dancing. And I think that those images are very powerful.
That's good. So we've got first of all Fiona and then Debbie.
Thanks. It was just you said at one point that taking obeticholic acid, but from first diagnosis, was probably the way to go. But I'm just wondering, does that apply as well to these other things, or do you think they're effective? Do you think they're going to be effective however long?
That's a really good question. I think they're different approaches. I think ochre is preventing the process from happening, and so therefore the earlier the better. I think Golexanalone is putting a plaster on the problem. Okay, so it is a downstream thing. So it is correcting part of the pathway. So I think Golexanalone and SAMI are downstream, obeticholic acid is upstream. So I think they're much more likely to be usable when the problem arises, because they are, in a sense, it's a bit like the itch pathway, isn't there? You've got a number of different ways you can control itch, all the way from the skin to the brain, and you know, some are downstream and some upstream, and you can control it by switching off the sensation of the brain, or you can stop it in the skin. So it's a really good question. So I think ochre is going to need to be done early, potentially other drugs as well. I don't think it's about ochre. I think it's about how you treat PBC, because that stops the whole thing from happening. But I think Golexanalone in particular will treat the problem when it's there. Clearly, stopping it from arising in the first place is the more elegant solution. But of course, that assumes that you can have the time and the opportunity to do that. So I think in practice, my best guess is Golexanalone will be more useful in practice, because you'll be able to use it a little bit later in the process.
Excellent. Debbie?
Thanks.
Oh, you're on mute.
You're muted, Debbie. We need to unmute you.
You said it was something that was available within your diet. What parts of your diet, what foods is it available in?
I know this because Mrs. Jones is very interested in, or Dr. Lynette, as she goes by her professional name, but Mrs. Jones, when she's telling me off, has lectured me about the almost complete absence of anything from my diet that contains this. So I can tell you it is green vegetables, it is kale, cabbage, Brussels sprouts, brassicas, things like that. So it's not your soft green vegetables like peas and beans, it's your hardcore green vegetables, the sort of thing that rabbits would probably resist.
Yeah, lovely.
So
yeah,
it's very much around sulfury. So the giveaway is that the glutathione has sulfur groups in it, okay? And those sulfur groups are really important. So sulfur soaks up these free radicals. And sulfur is that slightly horrible smell you get when you cook Brussels sprouts, okay?
yeah.
So anything that smells a bit sulfury when you cook it, they usually have got glutathione. So green vegetables particularly.
Excellent.
What's the treatment for dry eyes?
So dry eyes are important. I mean, and again, I think it's pretty neglected actually. So dry eyes to poor sleep to fatigue, I think, is a connection that people don't think of enough. So there are two reasons why people get dry eyes. So some people genuinely have dry eyes, okay? So if you measure the amount of tears, their tears are not there. And that has one type of treatment, but some people who feel like they've got dry eyes, in fact, have itch of the eyes. So you can get itch, PBC itch, affecting the eyelids. So we have successfully treated a number of people for that with itch treatment. So that's just worth bearing in mind. If it really is genuinely dry eyes, and you know, the doctors can check this easily, then what we tend to do is do two things. The first instance is use just what you call Hypocellus Eye Drops. So you put eye drops that stick in the eye. So not just kind of saline, but hypomellose, they're cellulose eye drops. And they just keep the eye moist. But there's a really clever treatment, which is where they plug the tear duct. So you've got a little duct there that drains the tears from your eye. You can pop a little plastic plug in it. It sounds gruesome. It absolutely isn't. So the ophthalmic people do it. And what they do is they go along, it takes about 10 minutes, they measure it up, find out your size, and then just put your eye back and pop a plug in it. And it takes 2 minutes to put them in once they're there. They just put eye drops in to make it, you know, put an anesthetic eye drop in. And once they've done that, they last about 3 months. And then they tend to drop out, and then you just go back to the clinic, put another one in. So they've got a service in Newcastle, lots of places now that does it. It just sounds worse than it is. But if you've really got dry eyes, it's incredibly effective. If you haven't got dry eyes, this is why it's important to work out if you haven't. If you haven't got dry eyes, your eyes start streaming, because you can't drain the tears away. But it's a really, for people with really dry eyes, it's a really clever treatment. And most people go, oh, I don't fancy the sound of that. It's really well worth persevering with it. It's never had a proper study in PBC. And sometimes things get done that are just, you do them and it's just so obvious they're effective that you just do them. So it's a standard NHS intervention. It's really simple and it's great for quality of life, but do have to check you have got dry eyes first, because otherwise but that's what the ophthalmologist would do. So we have a pretty low threshold for sending people to the ophthalmologist. Try the eye drops first, but if you're struggling with it, then have that done.
Yeah, I get hay fever, and it's the pollen that makes my eyes itch like crazy all the time.
Yes, it's right, isn't it? So itchy eyes feel gritty.
They do, yeah.
And your body senses these things, doesn't it? So, and it interprets that as grit, but it isn't.
I wipe them with this stuff, these wipes, you know, tea tree oil things. They're very good. Yeah. I mean, it works for a while.
Now, I'm going to have to leave you.
Yeah, that's fine, Dave. Thank you so much. We'll be publishing this on YouTube, and you'll have hundreds of people watching it as usual. But you just have an audience here.
I'll send you, and thanks for the questions. I'll send you those leaflets tomorrow. But please, you have a look at them, because as I said, the caveat is there's normally me to explain them and Kath to explain them, and so just check that there's nothing in there that people might feel uncomfortable if they downloaded it off the web. But that's great. They're there They're there to help people.
Yeah, and what about Marion? Sorry, we'll get in touch with your secretary about the DVD, the video.
We're at the time we can do that. I found a solution. We can film. I've got somewhere we can film it. We're all ready to go, and we just need to check when the film company can do it.
It's you that's short of time, Dave. We'll comply with whatever you can do. Okay. Thanks so much for giving up your time tonight.
No problem.
Thank
Really
you.
enjoyed it. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks now.
Bye. Okay, folks, I don't think we've got anything else to talk about. Everybody happy with that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Brilliant.
Yeah, good talk, isn't it?
Yeah,
He's
great.
a brilliant speaker.
Very
So
good.
I'll end the meeting for now, and we'll when the newsletter is about to go out, it's not going to be received by anybody until the 2nd of June. Okay, so you'll find out all about that eventually. Right. So I'm going to end the meeting, everyone.
Okay.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.